Well, there's the latest book. It came out at the end of 2017. So, and Joe very much helped me lay out the book. Working at Adventures Unlimited, it started out. This presentation started out just as a slide deck, and we munched it into the book. So, thank you very much, Joe. And it basically a summary of the last 10 years of research. At the point I started the research in 2016. And kind of this slide deck summarizes what I found. This gave this presentation at the Tesla conference in 2018. So if you go to the web and you could Google any of these names listed here, you'll find a story about a car or a generator running on water, internal combustion engines running on water. It sounds absolutely impossible. These stories have been going on for years. These are somewhat famous names. They tried to get their information out, typically ending in some type of suppression. My favorite is a water car from Pakistan, only because of what the reporter said. The reporter said, oh, the physics professors criticized, and he says it violates the laws of thermodynamics. And I love the reporter's response. He says, why all the whining about violating the laws of thermodynamics? Tell me one law in Pakistan that has not been violated. So that was attitude. So I got a kick out of that. So, but what's going on? What's really going on? Is it fraud? Is it hydrogen? Or is it something else? I usually ask the audience what they think. If they haven't heard any of this, they all jump on fraud. A lot of people say it's hydrogen because that's what the inventors think. And then something else, that's what I'd be talking about. It's going to get into zero-point energy and how that got involved on these experiments. Of course, it's easy to say fraud, right? It's just simply that it costs you more energy to break apart the water, and then you get back by burning it. Everybody knows that, but that's not the big loss for an internal combustion engine. I mean, your combusting engine, you're making heat to move the piston, which drives the generator. The engine is so inefficient. I mean, you're lucky if you get 25% efficiency on the thing. So you lost most of your energy. So to make a closed loop system where your generator provides the electricity that drives your electrolyzer, you got to be 5 times over unity just to overcome the losses just in the internal combustion engine and make a practical circuit of it. And so everybody knows this is impossible. So if anybody that runs a generator says they're running it on water, it's a spectacular claim. And I don't blame any scientist to create it has to be absolutely impossible, because that's what I would think too, and for these very reasons. So, and there's YouTubes up that show this. Well, if you wanted to mimic today's car and its capability, you would have to have 300 to 500 liters per minute of uncompressed hydrogen. Uncompressed, that means it's very expansive, just to achieve today's behavior of a car. So it's pretty obvious that it's way out of bounds to claim you're running a car on water. So most of the inventors thought they're certainly making some hydrogen, and so they naturally think, oh, it must be the hydrogen, right? Because that's what it said. But electrolysis can't yield excess energy. As I pointed out, this is standard equations in the textbook. It costs you more energy to break apart the water than you get back by burning the hydrogen. And then the other inefficiencies are like I described. Another way of looking at it is the energy state. Water is in a low energy state when the oxygen and hydrogen are combined together, and it costs you energy. You're in a higher energy state to make a molecular hydrogen, more energy still to break apart the hydrogen molecule, and of course, to take it into the plasma state, you have to provide a lot more energy still. So clearly, we're going in the wrong direction to use water as the fuel. So some people, hey, what if I shake it apart, do resonance like some people have claimed? I'm driving at these magical frequencies and the water will just shake apart for me. I said, fine. What is the resonant frequency of the water molecule bonds? Well, you could see just from the standard science, it's up there in the terahertz, in the infrared range, where the people doing these experiments are not even working at those frequencies. They're way down in acoustical or ultrasonic ranges in kilohertz. Well, then could it be something else? What could the something else be? Well, what I suggested, instead of tearing apart the water, what if the ultrasonic frequencies are making something in the water? And the what came out, I learned about in 2016 is an inventor. He has not been suppressed. He's kind of new. He's been kind of secretive in the field, and he does not use electrolysis. And when I read his patent, it was like a synchronistic miracle to me because earlier that year in 2015, I gave a presentation to the international water community called Thunderclouds and the Zero Point Energy. And I proposed there's an energetic effect happening in every single thundercloud and every single lightning stroke. And you can get to that on the web. You just have to Google my name, Moray King, with Water Conference, and you can see a YouTube of that presentation. And basically, what if we took a thundercloud, grabbed some of that material, put the thundercloud material into an internal combustion engine, which is just a cloud, given a big plasma discharge that mimics a thundercloud, just a mimic. That's all you have to do. And all of a sudden, there would be excess energy. I predicted that at the end of 2015. And then, sure enough, when I read the patent of Walter Jenkins, he knocked my socks off. By the way, this is his application in the United States. He did recently receive the patent granted in Canada. So eventually the United States, by the treaty, will grant him the patent as well. And basically what he did that's different than everybody else, he just made fog. He made fog. That frequency that he used, it just made a lot of visible fog. It's a standard fog maker for ponds, for decorative ponds. And those labels down at 220, they're the ultrasonic transducer. But a very important part of his apparatus that's different than what most people do is he added electrostatic grids, high voltage grids that basically charge up the fog particles. It turns out that this is an incredibly important step that he did, and I believe it was the key to making the device. Notice that's what happens up in thunderclouds. They get charged from all the frictional activity, electrostatic charging of the fog particles. And what are fog particles? Basically micron-sized droplets of water. That's all it is. Something else that he added and was very important part of his patent, a wide plasma spark plug. He's driving this thing about 100 to 200 kilovolts. Most spark plugs are down at 50 kilovolts. He fires it for the full downstroke of the piston. Right? And there's a diagram. He said he was inspired by the Tesla coil, the big sphere on top, to kind of come up with this spark plug. But how in the world can a fog particle be a fuel? That was, after all, it's nothing but a microscopic droplet of water. When it's subject to an abrupt discharge, you'd think it just would blow apart. Or, under certain circumstances, it could dimple in to this torus form, and when surrounded by the plasma, make a vortex ring of plasma. And this is the ball lightning form. This was the link to all my research, linking ball lightning and the anomalies thereof to what's going on in water. Basically, it's a spiral of a plasma that closes on itself, like a vortex ring closing on itself. This is a plasmoid type form. It's associated with excess energy in the various experiments that I've studied. And this was the key. If we could convert microscopic droplets of water into these plasmoid forms, it would exhibit excess energy. And that's the primary hypothesis of my work, that ball lightning itself coheres the vacuum, the 0 point energy of vacuum. That what is the world is this vacuum energy that I never heard of. Most professors, unless they're in physics, do not know of it. Right? They might there's now popular articles on it that mention it, and so they could popular books that they could get it. But what the heck is it? Right? I didn't know. My professors didn't know. Only I had to jump over and take some quantum physics courses just to learn more about it and be able to learn enough math to read the literature about what's going on. Well, as I mentioned earlier, this was the book that really triggered it for me. That the book Gravitation came out. It was John Wheeler's. Geometric Dynamics came out in 1962. That he authored. What an amazing physicist he was. I was hoping he'd win the Nobel Prize. For the amazing work he's done across the field of physics. He's well adored by the physics community. He's very famous because he would ask deep questions and come up with really incredible ideas. But the trouble is, it's so complicated, as I'll show you, that not much is done in physics because they like to mathematically compute everything. And the complexity of the quantum vacuum, that turns out to be very difficult. But basically, it's the foundation of the uncertainty principle. The fabric of space itself has all this jitter to it, this energetic activity, like microscopic lightning at a very tiny scale. They say it gives rise to these virtual pairs of electron-positron pairs that pop into existence and go out of existence. That's why they call them virtual, because they come in and out so fast that they don't seem to hang around. Doesn't seem like we get much energy here, and we'll show you why. Nonetheless, the equations of quantum electrodynamics say there has to be a particular spectrum where the energy density itself just goes up, like this cubic type function goes up with the frequency cube. And on the theories, there's really no limit. It has to be the spectrum, so all the equations work, but things can't go to infinity without something giving. It's going up towards infinity. And they call this discrepancy between our reality that we observe and the theories of the quantum vacuum. They call it the vacuum catastrophe. It's a very colorful name, and the actual scientific community calls it this because of this disconnect between the predictions by the theories and the way the equations have to be and what we just observe in reality. We don't see all this energy there, and yet they say all this energy is there. So just like this contradiction, this built-in contradiction. And I enjoy Nassim Haramein's video because he has a good sense of humor, so it's really fun to watch him as he talks about this. But here's PBS. This is like standard science, right? That they say this really exists, and this shows you their point of view. And they likewise call it the vacuum catastrophe. How could it be? This be? And at the end of this video, during the questions session, so what they do is they spend about 12 minutes into this video saying, I guess for the first 10 minutes, we just don't understand it. We just don't have a good theory of the vacuum. Right. And then when the question came out towards the end of the video, and somebody asked, well, what can you then tap? Is it possible to tap the vacuum energy as an energy source? And he goes, absolutely not. And I laughed and laughed because you just spent 10 minutes saying we don't understand it. We don't have a good theory of the vacuum. So how can you make a decree like absolutely? The correct answer is we don't know. And the experts on zero-point energy say exactly that. When posed that question, he says it's going to take an experiment to prove it, but we just don't know enough about our theories of the vacuum, and we have various points of view. We just don't know enough to make a decree. So we shouldn't be making decrees, but that's exactly what's done. In order to say it can't be done, it can't be done, let's ignore it. They say, well, it violates conservation of energy. I said, no, it doesn't. You acknowledge the energy's there. And so that so it can't be violation of conservation of energy. Well, we'll get into some of the what is it? Why can't it be tapped? What's their argument against it? And so we look at what a single vacuum fluctuation looks like. We're down at a tiny scale called the Planck length. They have that number there. That's 20 orders of magnitude smaller, let's say, than an elementary particle like an electron or a proton. It's a single vacuum fluctuation. And it's very fast, very small, and say it looks just like these random fluctuations. So just imagine space just churning with this microscopic electrical activity, and it just appears chaotic and random. And so Wheeler called it the quantum foam, a very colorful name. And basically what he described in geometric dynamics is his work is that electric flux enters and leaves our three-dimensional space. through these mini virtual particles that's making up the quantum foam that constantly are churning, appearing, and disappearing. And this is the fabric of space itself. And so it's a far more interesting and more dynamic model of what is the nature of empty space. In the old days, they thought it was an ether. They were using a hydrodynamic type model, and they would use the equations of hydrodynamics to try to describe the ether. And Maxwell's equations was an ether theory, and talking about vortices and sources and sinks as energy comes in, the fluxes. That's why the vocabulary of electromagnetism is the same vocabulary as hydrodynamics, because it's rooted in the original ether theories of the 1800s. Well, this is a far, far better ether than the simple hydrodynamic model. This is a virtual turbulent plasma model with all sorts of energetic opportunities for self-organizing events, like the production of elementary particles. The pair production. So here's what they're talking about, and this is the key that resolves the contradiction between how can there be a virtually infinite energy yet we don't see it. It's because we're embedded in we have a three-dimensional space that's embedded in a higher dimensional space. And so think of it as flatland, like we're on the surface of a table and we can only look out across the plane of the table, and we can't see the activity up and down in the orthogonal direction. So as energy pours through like a rainstorm, penetrating the plane of the table, penetrating the flatland slot, we'll see this turbulent activity on the left. And these are the incoherent vacuum fluctuations, the quantum foam, the chaos, the turbulence. It just appears to be random. However, if there's some tilt to it as it comes through, we call that a polarized vacuum. There seems to be a little bit of organization to it. And then Wheeler was speculating, well, what if we have vorticity as it comes through? If this flux comes through and then it has a vortex, this could be a model of the elementary particles themselves. So it's like the elementary particles are like a whirlpool in the stream. And as the stream flows by and creates a vortex, it sustains the vortex. And we can only see the vortex itself, the whirlpool in the water, and the flux, the constant flow of the stream going by, maintaining it, is like the zero-point energy flux coming through orthogonally to our three-dimensional space, and we get to see the elementary particles. Well, this is highly, highly complex, this type of self-organization, and so it's very difficult to ever try to model it by simplistic single point particles and then trying to get them to interact, because we're talking, 10 to the 20th power. Let's say 1 out followed by 20 zeros. This type of number of particles all interacting together to make a coherent entity. We don't have theories that describe that. Although chaos theories and things like that are starting to say, oh, self-organization can occur, this stuff can interact, and that was the foundation of my thesis, as we'll see. One of the things that happens is the pair production, meaning that out of this turbulence can pop out electron-positron pairs for a very short period of time. They come into existence. Right? How can this degree of self-organization occur? These are the foundations of the quantum electrodynamics. They say it does occur. It's constantly churning this activity. And what we do is, to make the equations work, we try to make most of it go away. A mathematical technique called renormalization. We try to adjust the equations such that this infinite activity is just irrelevant. It goes away, and we're left with this finite residue that's left to make our equations and our experiments work out. Let's see, we have this energetic interaction, but it's considered very, very small, and thus ignore the rest of that they take away and just focus on this little bit of residue that we see, and sure enough, the equations work out. But if you get into extreme conditions that we'll be talking about, that's where these other terms would come back into the equations and start to spill into our three-dimensional space. And so the idea of organization, self-organization, Robert Lachlan, but he nailed it. He wrote this book. He's a Nobel laureate. A Different Universe, Reinventing Physics from the Bottom Down. I love this book. Had he been my thesis advisor, he was out on the West Coast, I was on the East Coast, I probably would have just locked right onto him, and we would have been teamed up on this investigation. Can it happen to the vacuum energy? There are experts in the zero-point energy. Back in the 70s when I started, Timothy Boyer was considered the renowned expert on the theories of the vacuum. And he would suggested all quantum effects arise because of this interaction. In the 80s, Hal Puthoff became somewhat the leading voice in this. Notice they all published in the Physical Review, which is considered the most prestigious of the physics journals in the United States. And he said, well, the hydrogen atom can be explained by the zero-point energy interaction. This 1993 came out with this paper, Can It Be an Energy Source? This paper says, yes, it does not violate thermodynamics if it were to become an energy source. It doesn't, we don't know how to do it, but in principle, you would not have a violation, and therefore it's an open thing that's allowed by physics. So politically, it's an important paper because when people say, oh, it'll violate thermodynamics, no, it won't. Here's a paper in the PhysRev that says it is an open question, and that's how Puthoff puts it. It will take an experiment to prove it, but there's no theory that says in principle it can't be done. It violates it. He also showed that gravity could be sourced from the activity of the zero-point energy as well as inertia, as he teamed up. Now, inertia is really exciting because it means, gee, if the fields, you could cohere the zero-point energy, you're cohering your own inertia. It's like you can make a flying saucer propulsion, where you can do these hairpin turns and not feel the inertial stress of being slammed against the wall. That would typically happen, without these field effects. And so they created quite a bit of excitement to say, in principle, this could be possible. So all these exciting technologies could be sourced from the zero-point energy if we just knew how. So how do we activate it? Well, it turns out there are principles for system self-organization. Ilya Prigogine won the Nobel Prize back in 1977 in chemistry, as it turned out, but it was system theory that he used that says any highly nonlinear system, if you can abruptly drive it far from equilibrium, can exhibit system self-organization. This is coming from chaotic systems. And so you apply, that was the point of my thesis in 1978. That was like my proposal, my hypothesis, applying those thermodynamic principles that Ilya Prigogine just won the Nobel Prize for, apply that to the vacuum energy theory. And so to really affect the vacuum energy, you need to work with with those particles that maximize their interaction with it. And that's where we get to using ions and vortexes, vortex forms, to start to entrain coherence with the underlying quantum vacuum energy. Turns out the nucleus of the atom, the protons, the heavy particles, they have these converging lines of vacuum polarization towards the particles. These particles are stable and are well localized. In contrast, for example, to an electron, which is more like a smear charge cloud. So if you take these ions and you abruptly move them, the more abrupt, the better. If you can jerk them, you can see as the zero-point energy flux comes through, some of that flux gets aligned into our flatland slot, into what would be our three-dimensional space, and you're bending some of that flux into our space, and now it's interacting with the plasma. We have energy interacting that normally would pass right through. So the key would be jerking or abruptly moving the ions or getting ion motion of some type involved, and that's why we see the anomalies in the plasma experiments. And if we make these ball lightning plasmoid forms, which are a spin of a spin, a vortex ring, one type of spin curling into another type of spin, you have this opportunity of ortho-rotating. That's a phrase that Tom Bearden came up with, means bend at right angles. So it's the orthogonal flux model of Wheeler, which means it's coming through at right angles to our space. These ball lightning forms can bend some of this into interacting with the ball lightning form for maybe just a few milliseconds, but it's sufficient to manifest excess energy. These forms as we'll see from experiments in a few moments, that they manifest excess energy in them in anomalies, like a self-acceleration. This thing takes off on its own, like a warp drive, like a flying saucer. There is excessive force that's exhibited when this happens, and of course, excess energy. These are the anomalies that we're looking for in the experiments to show, this is how the interaction occurs, and this is why these forms make opportunities to create excess energy. So is there any evidence? Well, we could look at nature, and thunderclouds indeed exhibit the characteristics of certainly of abrupt discharge. That's a lightning stroke. And it shows that every abrupt discharge every lightning stroke has a ball lightning precursor on it that carves a channel. And you can go to the web and find high-speed photography of lightning. Very new technology. We really haven't been able to capture this until, let's say, into the 2000s, late 90s, where the technology started to develop, where we could observe this. Prior to that, it was always invisible to us because it was too quick to see with the eye. And it was in high-speed photography of lightning and other events, lightning-type events associated with thunderclouds, that we start to see, indeed, these ball lightning forms occurring for a few milliseconds. And if the lightning at that is pretty impressive, but even more impressive still is what's happening above the lightning, especially in these high, big events called sprites. And the sprites probably offer the best evidence in nature. Right, they're huge. Like they're 50 miles high for one event, for one big event, 30 miles wide. It's amazing. They're lucky to capture them and capture these on camera. They kind of, what they do is they fly up in the planes above the thundercloud, just point, and they got technology like 1,000,000 frames per second. They just point above the thundercloud and hope they capture something, right? Because it's too quick for the eye. Sure enough, they've captured them. They've seen them. They're sprites. So they have been captured in high-speed photography. These events are on the order of a millisecond. You can see them. You can go out to YouTube and see these events. And here's a summary of it.
Every time there's lightning?
Every time. Well, the sprites, not necessarily on every event. Those are the huge, big events, the sprites themselves. But certainly every single lightning stroke has a ball lightning precursor on it at the tip. Okay. And in fact, some of the speakers at the energy conference over the years were saying, I think every spark has anomalous energy associated with the tip of that spark. And we're going to go into more details of this ball lightning form. And because of the high-speed photography, they're able to catch some of the details. For example, they see the plasma balls, and they're huge. They're about 10 meters in size. And they immediately get themselves up to about 1/10 of the speed of light. They're launched from the glow plasma halo above. And there's gamma rays that implying antimatter that are coming from this. They actually detected antimatter in the form of electron-positron pairs from the satellites. So here we have an example of antimatter being created from these events here on Earth. And I would say that's an example of coherence of the vacuum energy. Remember, we talked about these virtual pairs. Well, these events are so energetic, we actually separate out the positrons from the electrons. They got caught on the magnetic field of the Earth, and they're able to stay in existence for a while. And they captured them on those satellites, the Fermi satellite that would measure gamma rays and electron-positron pairs, and annihilation of that. And that was the evidence that I pointed to. It happens on every single sprite formation. These events occur. The actual evidence of electron-positron pairs being in existence, and NASA came up with this. You can go to YouTube and watch the videos on them. So that's the implications from nature, but it's pretty tough to measure your energy inputs and outputs because it's highly energetic activity. So we can't make any conclusions about excess energy just by looking at nature. But we can do experiments. And Peter Graneau pointed out the history of these anomalies around water, just water, and in an arc. For example, back at Harvard, Professor Trowbridge, back in 1907, showed, gee, just spraying some mist in a discharge, a capacitive discharge spark, it's much louder, right? And that was a puzzle because, gee, why should water mist make something louder? Because it's not providing any energy, right? It's not a fuel like you would think of it. There's no energy in it, yet that was being observed. Electrical mist sprayed in the arc. Professor Frungolf in Germany during the war discovered the same thing, and he's drilling on. He says, well, that excess energy, that force, is not from heat or steam. Later on, he developed the technology to make an echo sounding device where you can make an echo and measure the bottom of a lake with this type of technology. Rock fragmentation experiments. They do water rock type explosions, and gee, we seem to have excess energy here. And they noted that in the study, but they just thought, oh, we must have made a mistake. That can't really be. So they didn't think of it. But Peter Graneau made a career out of studying this phenomenon. He's an MIT professor. He was also one of the co-editors and on the board of Infinite Energy magazine. So he really, really made a contribution. And what he did, this is back in 1985 when it was published in the Journal of Applied Physics. He says, all I do is make an abrupt discharge in water from a capacitor bank, and it better be abrupt enough, because if it's very abrupt, he can propel a weight up into the air. He can measure how far he put the weight up. So, okay, I'm measuring excess force, excess energy. And we had some experiments where I blow out the bolts on the containment. You go, whoa, you blew out the bolts? That was the majority of the energy. You didn't even measure that. And high-speed photography indeed photograph some plasmoid events in the apparatus itself from this abrupt discharge. So there's a piece of evidence, but now he's actually measuring excess force. Well, if you blow out the volts, we can do better than that. And Gary Johnson, he's professor at Kansas State University in the 90s, did a better improved experiment. He made a chamber, spherical chamber, that these are the weights that get flown apart on guide wires. So he contains his water, contains his electrodes in there, does the capacitive discharge, and just photographs video how high the weights does he throw them up. Now, instead of blowing apart bolts and never making that measure, he captured all the energy in the experiment, and thus he can repeatedly do this experiment every single time and show that he has both excess force and excess energy over what he had on that capacitor, meaning he has a repeatable over unity experiment that repeats every time. He's a professor of electrical engineering. He quietly published it in the proceedings, the energy proceedings of the conference, and everyone ignored him, right? Maybe us, except for us esoteric people that study this energy and say this is possible. They will not repeat the experiment. It did not make a lot of publicity around himself. He just quietly published in the journals and in the proceedings of conferences. Did not care to propose a hypothesis of where the energy is coming from or anything like that. So unlike cold fusion, where they made a whole circus around proposing it was fusion, he says, I'm just measuring the energy anomaly that was discovered by Peter Graneau, gives Peter all the credit for the discovery, and showing indeed it's truly, truly there. So it's amazing that here we have a repeatable experiment in academia that's completely ignored. Harold, go ahead.
Why do you think it's completely ignored?
Because you're ridiculed if you suggest, gee, we're violating conservation of energy. Every other, they're like, would peck them and says, we're going to throw you out. Only people that have tenured could possibly say that, and they're just ignored or ridiculed. And so the tenured professor like Harold Aspin, he wasn't bashful about saying enormous explosive effects found in the pulse ion discharges in water. He linked it to the abrupt ion motion. That was really part of the trigger. So he speaks at these energy conferences. So you would say the standard academic community has to follow a party line on what is permitted and what is not permitted. And you'll see this across the board in other fields of science, especially biology and health. Boy, talk about academic suppression. It's a whole nother topic that you could see, but you could summarize your question was why. It's to protect financial interests. In the case of energy, let's say the financial interest is the oil industry maintaining the status quo as we have it. That industry says nothing new can happen. If you want your university funded by our contributions, you will stay with what we say. Most professors, unless they are in physics, will say, I've never heard of it, therefore it cannot be true. And so the engineering community, that's who I tend to address, never heard of it, and therefore this can't be. So if you, and so that's normal human reaction to a paradigm shift. In the physics community themselves, when they talk about the vacuum catastrophe, they don't like it because it just makes the equations too complicated. It's just the self-organization business. There's no reductionistic model that you can make, that you can do mathematical computations. There's kind of a belief in physics community. You've heard of theory of everything and string theory and things like that. Basically, to do these calculations and make the theory work, they have to get rid of the vacuum energy. Otherwise, everything gets too complicated. So they find a way to get rid of it, renormalize it away in their equations. If they need more flexibility in the physics, well, they'll allow more terms, add a little more dimensionality to the model, and make the theory more flexible, and therefore can pretty well, you can arrange to map it to experiments. But the idea of how do I predict a system self-organization from Avogadro's number, that's 10 to the 23rd power, particles participating to make a macroscopic big self-organization, there's just no way that can be computed, right? It just has to be observed. And that was Lauchlin's thesis. So it's very, very unpopular because today physics is popular because they claim we know we can predict everything with our equations. Everything must follow these equations, and therefore it must be calculable. So we have to simplify it so you can do any calculations at all. And even in those simplified equations, they can't really make practical calculations. So the answer is it just doesn't fit the paradigm. The paradigm is the common belief of the scientific community, what people believe to be the reality. And there's some websites exploring, gee, let's just use those water explosions as a fuel. Let's just apply it. And it's being explored. Little crude. Turns out we can do a lot better than using bulk water. In fact, that's what we'll get to. And sure enough, in the high-speed photography, Peter Graneau was seeing cool fog as the residue after the explosion. And somehow he intuitively knew that fog is very important. Somehow that's involved. And he's right on the money, as we'll see. Those fog particles exist. This is my colleague, David Faust. He passed away recently. We came out to Utah together. And basically, his roots was corona discharge photography. And he was able to capture events on corona discharge. This is like the Curlian photography. And he noticed that for controlled experiments, the moisture content of the environment dominates what you're going to see. So that was the hard part of these experiments, is to get that under control. But there were stories of ball lightning events, microscopic ball lightning events associated with the apparatus, and he found out he could trigger these events if he and observe them if we use low light level video cameras. Then he realized, gee, it's very rare to get a really bright event. He got captured a few of those, but most of the time you get these low light events that you can see. And all I did was the apparatus was a single high voltage pulse, and then just a little water spray on the device. You would make these things, and sometimes the persistence would last over a minute. So this was a little bit of evidence of the ball lightning. And we were both back in Philadelphia together on the East Coast. So he was providing some experimental evidence of these tiny ball lightning type of activities, and we both got invited to come out and continue and do the research at Eyring in Utah, Eyring Research Institute. And that's how we ended up in Utah. As we were invited to do the research, and they were interested. But here's my hero for the experimental investigations of the microscopic ball lightning form. Ken Shoulders made a career of studying these. He always got private funding. He was very, very quiet, did not toot his own horn, just quietly published papers on the web or in the various journals, published a book about his experimental studies. And the simplest experiment that got him started was, just a sharp pointed electrode, cathode, where he abruptly discharged a capacitor onto it. And we'd launch this little BB on a dielectric or an insulator that would microscopic ball lightning, essentially. It had all that behavior. And as soon as it hit a conductor, it would make a crater. And he would study this. And he said, the energy to make that crater is a lot bigger than the energy they put on my little capacitor to make the event in the first place. So he's getting the first indications of excess energy. And he was conservative. He didn't know what it was, what the form it was taking. It was basically, he always discussed observations. And by the way, that patent is wonderful that he ended up publishing, over 100 columns. It was written by him, so it's not written in legalese. So I have to say that was a very enjoyable patent to read, and I highly recommend it because he's explaining everything in this patent. It's readily available to everybody, but this was the essence of his discovery. The Russians were interested, and Nassim Masyats. He's like a vice president in the Russian Academy of Science. He got very interested in this particular experiment. And he was repeating them in Russia, and he was explaining how this forms. He says, it is a microscopic, this is a blow up of the microscopic tip of the pointed cathode. He says what happens, a little bit of liquid metal forms. There's a little blob, and it starts to make a protuberance that comes up into the polarized corona around it just before the discharge. And what happens, the tip of it blows off. So what we have is a symmetrical blob of liquid metal. And it was very important to have this symmetrical form to make the plasmoid in the first place. That was the key to making it. And so without it, you can't make a vortex ring. A vortex won't close on itself, right? Like a tornado, you can't get the tip to close on itself. But if you make it all at the same time by surrounding the plasma around a symmetrical form, like a blob of liquid metal on the order of a micron or a half a micron in size, it will make the ball lightning type form. And that was the key. He called it Electrum Validum. That was Latin for strong charge. He said they exhibit a charge. It seems like they have about 100 billion electrons. It manifests this charge like that. It drags about 1 million ions with it from the environment and the thing. And here's interesting, the charge to mass ratio always appeared to be the same as the electron. He would do the bending experiments in magnetic fields and say, isn't that interesting? It always seems to settle out at that ratio, regardless of how big it is. And indeed, they contain excess of energy. And when he became convinced, I'll get to that in a moment. He changed the name when he was convinced that the excess energy indeed came from the vacuum energy. I feel that the positive EV was the most significant of his experiments that he did because it contains the charge, it exhibits the charge to mass ratio like the positron. Same, just flip the charge. But here's what's important. It was not comprised of positrons themselves. He would not get all the gamma radiation that you would get from positron electron annihilation when it hit the target, hit the metal, and it would dissipate. It never got radiation like that, which means it was not made of positrons, which means that the other form that's negatively charged was not made of electrons. It's like we were manifesting a large charge from the vacuum itself. For a few instances. And he had pair production. He called them dual EVs. EV was short for Electrum Validum. And look, they would circulate around each other. So he did a pair production like experiments. So these are all available. I believe there's some websites that captured his work, and his papers are still available. So I guess if you Google his name, you can hunt down people as they repost his work on their websites. And he also observed what he called the black EV. It goes dark for a while, but it's still there, and it's in a small voltage pulse can reactivate it, and it becomes light again. So this was kind of like what Dave Faust was observing with his low light video cameras. He would observe these dark ones, and they were more common than we realized because they're not always emitting light. So Ken discovered this as well. And so these tiny little microscopic ball lightning forms are more common than we realize because they contain excess energy from the vacuum. He changed the name to EVO, exotic vacuum object. He loved this observation. It would exhibit this propulsion. It would immediately like zip up to 1/10 the speed of light, and it dragged along debris. So it reminded you of this warp drive type of thing. Here's the Albuquerque warp drive. It was published in the journal article. So he's just seeing principle. You can warp space because, general relativity, if you provide enough energy, you can start to warp space and make a warp drive. Well, if you're cohering the vacuum energy, that's your energy source. To do that, we could never provide enough energy from external sources to do it. But if you cohere that vacuum energy, these possibilities exist, warping space-time with it. And that's where you get to the concept of these flying saucer propulsion types things, these warp drives, science fiction coming to life. It's in principle possible once you start to be able to say the zero-point energy exists and it can be cohered by these means. And it seems like the means was let's cohere it into these vortex ring type forms. That's the key to getting to the energy. His biggest energetic event that he could produce was, what if I use that little EV as a seed to energize a bigger vortex? So he'd make these little vortices of water through these boreholes, and then shoot an EV right down that vortex. It would make an extremely powerful pulse. And this is magnification effect. He could not find a way to harvest it. It would damage anything it hit. He gave the analogy of, it's like shooting a bullet at a windmill blade. It would just go right through. And so the concentration was way too high. And I said, wow. But he says, this is the biggest concentration, is the biggest compelling experiment that says, I have tremendous energy here that I concentrated into this form. Keep that vortex idea in mind. We'll come back to that. In fact, we'll come back to it right now. We get into the work of Schauberger. Well, the vortex in water, we all know about that, tornadoes and things like that. But what if we took that into a plasma form, right? Then we might get really big effects. And sure enough, this is observed. If you make plasma, vortices of plasma, you have high rapid circulation of the heavy particles, the ion forms, the nuclei themselves. And remember they have the concentrated vacuum energy. And this is where we get to big effects. And Viktor Schauberger, just working water, would observe some of these effects and some energy anomalies from that, because, you know, you get ionization naturally happening in everything, in water and that sort of thing. And even from that little bit of ionization, observations of excess energy were occurring. And Viktor Schauberger was famous for that. And you can read about him on the web. A lot of people have really researched his work. And if he can make a spin of a spin, which he did with these whirl pipes, where it spins, and he put a second order spin on it, then he was absorbing excess energy from this type of flow. Paul Pantone, it turns out he was a local inventor. I met him here in Utah in the late 90s. And he was out here, and he stumbled across a vortex phenomena that I talked about. He called it GEET, Global Environmental Energy Technology. Steve Ellswick of the Tesla conference really, really loved his work, and they have a lot of information that they published up there. And he did get a patent in the late 90s. Here's a blow up of it, how he made it. Basically, the important part is this manifold that he gets some fuel mist coming through, and there's a metal rod in the center of it, and it causes the fuel mist to go into a spiral and going around the rod, and then coming out of the engine, we would have the exhaust, likewise surrounding the input manifold, thus heating it, and it too could exhibit a vortex form. And he was observing anomalies with this, energetic anomalies. This is probably a really, really simple experiment. I was recently got to see, he came out with the book just before he died. I don't know if they have a second book, but there was his first book in 2015. I highly recommend it. There were incredible observations mentioned in the book. It's like unbelievable. So talk about strange tales. Paul Pantone had the strangest tales, and he did not get traction because he would talk about this at conferences, and it's mentioned in the book, that it was just bizarre. Like, it's unbelievable. So most people said, oh, he has to be a kook to say he's observing this type of thing. He would have a little manifold window on the side, and he would observe on the north rod. The rod would actually get magnetized from the activity. He would absorb a little plasmoid type form from it. He would have ionized vapor, and there was a dual vortex, as I mentioned, a spiral down the middle one going around the rod, spiral coming up on the manifold, and it would end up magnetizing the steel rod. And so there was a clue when I heard, oh, you're observing a plasmoid. This is really of interest to me because I know that's the key. That gives an evidence that we're manifesting vacuum energy. And then he said, wow, if I really got high engine speed, I would start to manifest this plasmoid activity around the entire thing. Right? If you turn out the lights, you would start to see this glow. Right? And even get some of these little ball lightning forms seeming to appear on this. And then he says it begins to disappear, like at even higher engine speeds. I said, what? This is bizarre, right? This was in his book, right? So this is like a book review of what he's doing. It reminds me of the Philadelphia experiment. The thing starts to fade away. Have you heard of that?
Yeah. Yep.
Philadelphia's back. That's, they can read about it. There's books on it. Basically, about they were trying to do invisibility experiments in World War II, and they would surround the ship by a field, and all of a sudden it would disappear. And then stories get bizarre. It's going into the fourth dimension, and all this other stuff around it. But Paul Pantone's saying the same thing from this simple apparatus once he was driving at high speed. So this is like over the world. Top absurd, right? But it's intriguing if it's really happening. The plasmoid is what caught my attention. By the way, he even did experiments making a glass manifold where he could see what's going on inside. And what did he see? He would see lightning activity kind of surrounding the rod and this type of thing, just from the flow of this. So, and the glass seemed like it had a magnetic field associated with it. And it was a bizarre observation. Whatever, it's energized, but the rod would always have the north side pointing up. And if you flip it the other way, you could use a compass to measure which is the north end, which is the south end. So north is still up. I mean, he would demonstrate this, and everybody's mind was blown because it's obvious that this glass rod is not the source of the magnetic field. It seems to be necessary to manifest this anomaly of whatever he did to imprint this thing, but he would get this very bizarre observation that's like impossible. So physics professors, he would demonstrate this. So for anybody in academia, he said it was always the same way when they held the rod themselves and they did this observation, they would always drop the rod on the floor and shatter it. He said he stopped letting them handle it because they got so upset that they were that they couldn't believe it. It was blowing their minds, and so he says it's bizarre. They wanted to destroy it. They can't have it by accidentally dropping it. So it was a funny observation. So it's like the rod's imprinted with some type of dual vortex thing. So we're getting out of standard science here. We have no explanation for this, and it interacts with the Earth's magnetic field, and somehow it always gets this manifestation around the rod. It's so, as I said, we're out of standard science trying to explain something like this. So we're getting in these hyper-dimensional ideas. He also used crazy fuels. I think he did this so as not to be taken too seriously, to avoid suppression. In a work, people didn't have much respect for Paul Pantone in general. They just said that can't be. So he said, "Oh, I can run my engine on crude oil, pickle juice, right? Coffee, soda pop." I mean, it was like he's making a clown out of himself, and he did that intentionally. Because I asked the obvious, well, what happens if we circulate water? He says, I don't do that. I said, why not? Because they threaten me, right? But that's where the science goes, right? He made these implications with the silliness, but people doing experiments. Well, you guys can do water, but don't tie it back to me because I'm being threatened by this. So this is what gets you to the science, right? And sure enough, we got some ionization, and it fits the thesis that a plasma vortex coheres the 0-point energy. Yeah, I've been saying this for years. It's the ions that are important. If you can charge it up by friction, like happens in thunderclouds or in tornadoes and things like that, those frictionally charged particles become the large particles. They're circulating very fast in the vortex. And basically, whether it's dust, ice pellets, or grapple is what they call. Basically, that's how they make friction in the thunderclouds. That's what they call it. Frozen water. They convert over to the plasmoids. When the plasma surrounds it, they become the plasma. So we have a vortex of these microscopic plasmoids, and so it happens in all the tornadoes. It's a charged vortex, and sure enough, the few survivors that actually got caught into a tornado to observe what's going on inside, they see the internal lightning as well as the ball lightning inside the vortex of a tornado itself. And so that's the self-organization. Notice the shapes of the plasma. These are laboratory shapes that are observed in the plasma discharge tubes when they're studied, and you can see the similarity to a normal tornado. Self-organizing structures, cohering the vacuum energy. Don Reed's a good friend of mine. He's been studying this since the 70s. We kind of been active the whole time giving. He's a math teacher, so he likes to do these mathematical models. And he says, gee, this Beltrami vortex was the key, where the flow, the magnetic field and the velocity of the particles are in alignment with each other. And when this happens, it's essentially a vortex form where this occurs. He said this is the key to tapping the 0-point energy. So Don Reed came up with a very fundamental principle, and he presented it at the energy conferences in the 90s, and his work was published. So I think he's right on the money with that idea. I think the experiments are supporting him. So what can we do? Well, the goal is the easiest experiment. Make it clear. Don't have any other fuel involved in your experiment. We want widespread replication because this is what would beat suppression. And that's the point of massive replication. Otherwise, people would do it. But the suppression occurs because they can't believe it. That's what the professors were saying. Therefore, it's not worth trying. So, what's the best experiment? And so, over the last 10 years, it appears to be the energetic fog gas from the water electrolyzers themselves. It looks like this is the simplest that can be done, and it's been noticed observations, anomalies associated with Brown's gas. That's where we have both the electrolyzer produces the hydrogen and the oxygen together. But in addition to that, it produces something else. And this is why, and it's not something else where the energy anomalies were coming from. Here's a big observation that people know about. It's a cool flame. It's barely above the boiling point of water. They show demos. You can pass your hand quickly through it. And it doesn't boil water even. And yet, it can vaporize tungsten. And it would oxidize it as well if you're in air. So it's hard to say. Well, we certainly can melt it. And that's for sure. Everybody agrees with that. Whether we sublimate it all the way up to a vapor is controversial because it would oxidize first. But nonetheless, it would take a lot of heat if it was a normal torch. And here's the example, how much heat it takes. Brown's gas is hardly hot, right? And yet it's doing this anomaly with tungsten that the other torches have trouble doing, right? Vaporizing it, oxidizing it, barely being able to melt it. And here we're doing it at a low temperature. How can this be? Well, I knew how it could be because I knew about Ken Shoulder's work. That I knew there had to be EVs in there because he said the reason why these EVs and this microscopic form of ball lightning makes craters is because it causes the high melting point ceramic or metal, causes those atomic bonds just to let go as they interact with this form, not by heat. It's not heat that's melting the metal. It's disrupting the atomic bonds that makes the metal or the ceramic with coherent energy that's trapped in the plasmoid. And this is why the Brown's gas torch does so well. It had to have EVs. And I knew this from the study of Ken Shoulder's work. So I don't really start until I think about 2006 of studying the Brown's gas anomalies and things like that. And at first I thought, well, maybe they're making these electrolyzers are making too much hydrogen. Somehow we're cohering the 0 point energy to disassociate water. And it wasn't that at all. As soon as I realized the characteristics of the torch, I said, he's making EVs in there. That's what's in that torch. And that's where we're getting the excess energy. This has nothing to do with hydrogen as far as the excess energy anomalies. It's everything to do with these EVs. So it became apparent. And the problem is I need a symmetrical particle in the water to make the EV or at least in the gas before I ignite it. I need something because to make it, I need that symmetrical particle to be the form for the plasma to surround. But what is it? The whole quest was what's in the water. The 10 years of research was trying to find what is the particle that would support the EV formation. That was the focus because I could not find anything in the standard literature to tell me this water cluster is there. And I kept searching for it. And most of my talks were hypothesizing, could it be this? Could it be that? I was trying to find it. And so I was late to the party. I wasn't the first to propose that. George Wiseman, who was an expert at studying Brown's gas in the 90s, and his website's wonderful. He's really did a great job of studying the science. He likewise proposed some type of structure in the water, or in that Brown's gas at least. He called it electrically expanded water, is what he named it. He used that symbol E cross X, E cross W and an electric shock tends to implode back to water. He likewise proposed something similar, and so I credit him with that discovery because he proposed it, I think, in 1996, and so I think he was the first to make that connection. And as people were studying that, this cool fog sometimes gets emitted from the electrolyzer. And that was the clue, that this cool fog, it was the mist coming from it. People would observe and photograph or video the HHO mist above the electrolyzer itself. That was the key. It was these particles that were doing. And can we deal with injecting water mist itself? Yeah, I mean, it was observed by Professor Frungel. There was an anomaly, and that's what Stan Myers did for his final invention. It was the water injector plug. He's famous for doing the dune buggy. Stan Meyer got plenty of publicity. He was a marvelous speaker at the energy conferences. Lots of videos, YouTubes that are up on his research. Um, but his final apparatus was the water fuel injector plug. And it was basically injecting mist, ionized mist, in fact, into the water. Here's the Canadian patent application that he proposed. It's a mixture of water, ionized air, and some rare gas, some argon. Makes me wonder why he chose that. But he kind of like was inspired. He looked like he was channeling ideas. That's what people say about him. He was very much an inspired inventor. Here's a picture of it. It's like a shower head nozzle in a way, very tiny. It's small though. It has this fits as the spark plug. That was the idea, to retrofit cars with this apparatus. And there was the mixture you have, the ionized air. It's not a simple device because you had to have quite a bit of circuitry to drive the injector plug. So it was non-trivial, but he felt in mass production for a few $1,000s, he could convert internal combustions over. And that was the goal, to convert this over. And then what happened to him? He was actually murdered. They were celebrating with two Belgian investors at a restaurant. And there was a poisoning event. Dean Narciso in Chicago, really, his investigative reporter made it a point to drill in on what's going on around this murder. That's what happened to Stan Meyer. Murdered. So they think the hitmen were actually these investors. They were really posing as investors, but they were out to. Their intentions was to get rid of him because he was trying to make a factory to mass produce these things. That's what the goal was back in the late 90s. And
Yeah, didn't he just started like choking at the restaurant, and how did that happen?
yeah, they said it was a poisoning, that he didn't drink alcohol, but they were kind of celebrating. And the story was he went off to the bathroom. They somehow put it in his cranberry juice that he ordered. And when they came by, he like took a sip of it and then started saying they poisoned me. He immediately ran out of the restaurant because he started barfing. And his twin brother came out, and his last words were, "They poisoned me." Right? And he pretty well died right there. So he would not. He was very headstrong. You know, I noticed the people that finally get murdered, they will not take no. They won't be bought. Right? Didn't matter as stories. Oh, they offered me billions of dollars to sell out, and he's idealistic, right? He would basically not going to sell it out to the big money, and so they had to finally basically bump him off. And so very very few people, most people will succumb to the threats, right? They can't really defend themselves against a mafia like threats, right? They don't have any defense. And so most inventors just agree to quit. I think it's probably wise to do. If you can't, he who fights and runs away lives to fight another day. In other words, you might as well cooperate because there's nothing you can do anyway. And then later on, you can quietly share information and just get the information out because you're pretty well done. They're not going to let you go and manufacture it. And so it was the existence of nanobubbles or nanoparticles in the electrolyzer itself. There's the formation of the nanobubbles, And we'll get into that was the key. Why this is why electrolyzers themselves were manifesting the excess energy to make these tiny particles, because we're getting them from the nanobubbles. I haven't heard of this nanobubbles. In fact, I was quite late to the party. I didn't realize this and really until 2015, where I was researching. I'll get into that later. I have slides later. Ryushin Amasa and the Japanese research, and they discovered nanobubbles of what were stable. And here's from the hydrogen. In other words, the particle that I was looking for was was the nanobubbles forming in the electrolyzers, because I did not know they existed. I finally learned of them from the Japanese research. I got to Professor Martin Chaplin in England's website, who finally said in 2010, the community of water researchers that finally acknowledged and accepted the existence of nanobubbles. So in a way, I was good company. I was late to the party. I had no idea they existed. The water community refused to believe it. It wasn't until the Japanese, starting in 2006, did laser backscatter experiments under a microscope where they could track individual bubbles and show they did have a long lifetime. The water community couldn't exist. They says, wait a minute, surface tension can't take this high curvature on something this small. This should not exist. So the fact that I didn't know it, well, was not accepted. That's why I couldn't find it in the literature till later, until I finally discovered the Japanese work. And then all the dots then connected. And these things are incredibly strong, especially these surface nanobubbles. I mean, there was a study that they did. It can withstand a shock wave of about 60 atmospheres. It's like these little igloos on a submicron scale, the nanoscale, could withstand an overpressure and bounce right back. They're very flexible, but they're holding together. And so it's amazingly strong. And that once I had a strong particle, I got it. That's what I needed. So the plasma can surround it to make the ball lightning. I know I have. But why are they strong? It was the Japanese that came up with the real explanation why they're strong, because they cocoon some charge in them. All the other theories were working with neutral bubbles. They were just thinking of surface tension like membrane models. And the surface tension is just not strong enough to make them. But what if your cocoon traps some charge, and that charge inside that cluster, that bubble? Well, it would naturally, because water's polarized, it would be attracted towards the charge. And you can imagine that membrane kind of squeezing in and becoming strong. That membrane, because we trap some net charge in it. And that was their explanation. It was a pretty good one. In fact, it's Patton Takahashi, his name. He's one of the leading professors in Japan was kind of leading this discovery. So you could call him the big name as far as the discovery of the stability of nanobubbles. So I guess we give him credit, but other people were doing the research, and he was like the leading professor proposing it and proposing the explanation of why they were stable. In a way, it was foreshadowed. Andrija Puharich had a water electrolyzer patent. It was an interesting patent to read because he would talk about observing things. He was a true empirical scientist. He'd get a big magnifying glass and observe these strong bubbles. They would polarize, they would hug each other. They were quite robust and strong. And he said, isn't that interesting that these bubbles are so tough? And he made that observation back in 1983. And so we will look at how do we connect the various electrolyzers of brown gas with the nanobubbles. Well, it turns out quite a few things end up making nanobubbles, including electrolysis. This was a study under a stroboscopic microscope where they could image the bubble formations. And this happens on every electrolyzer plate. The nanobubble starts at the electrolyzer, especially at the hydrogen side of the electrolyzer, and it just gradually grows. It starts as a nanobubble accumulating hydrogen, gradually grows to a microbubble on the order of a micron. Then it bursts, freeing the free hydrogen. And so the scientific studies show they exist. So what if we could get those nanobubbles off the plate early while they're in that strong form? And thus the inventors who are getting the anomalies in Brown's gas were doing things that got those bubbles off the plates early, before they form up into microbubbles. And all the way back in 78, Archie Blue had a patent. This says, I'm going to blow air through it, right? Didn't know why this would help. But all of a sudden, he was claiming, oh, I can make a water car and I can, run generators just by doing that trick. And everybody's going, what does that have to do with hydrogen? Well, absolutely nothing. But it has a lot to do with getting the bubbles off the plates quickly, scraping them off by the air, shearing from the air. And thus, that's why it worked. So he was inadvertently, they didn't know this, making these nanobubbles. And once I made them, I got my ability to make the ball lightning. Likewise, any cavitation makes bubble forms. It's famous for making these toroid forms in cavitation itself. Now these are cavitation bubbles are actually vacuum bubbles from the ultrasonic excitation, and they form right up in the torus, and they make these reentrant jets. And Mark Leclerc studied this, and he's famous, in my opinion, for saying these are the anomalies caused by cavitation itself, because at the very tip of that reentrant jet, who you call it a plasma bow shock wave, and it carves right through high melting point ceramics. I says, that's the EV. You discovered the same thing in Ken's shoulders did. And I was glad that I was able to get, before Ken died, I got Mark and Ken shoulders in a conversation together on the phone, just before Ken passed away. And so I said, you guys have made the discovery. And you can go to Mark Leclerc's website, nanospired.com. I think he changed the name. Both names existed. I think he got nanospire.com as well as nanospireinc.com to look at the research. But he's saying this is the reason for the craters. Like they're just like the EV craters from cavitations, famous for cratering up the propellers. And he says it also can help when you get into cavitation to not let microbubbles really form, shear up the bubbles before they form, and then you can create, cavitation helps you create nanobubbles as well. Likewise, any type of an abrupt motion draws a cavitation bubble, and this got me to the work of Ryushin Amasa. This is from his website. He had these very flexible blades that would snap, and behind that snapping activity draws a cavitation bubble. Here's a little GIF showing they launch reentrant jets. And Ryushin Amasa, likewise, made a significant discovery in Japan. And it was studying his work that led me personally to the discovery of the Japanese nanobubbles, because he was teaming with, I think, at Tokyo University, professors there to discover what's going on in this gas. Because likewise, in his electrolyzer, with these vibrating blades, he was drawing an anomalous gas that cocooned the hydrogen in them. He was basically making nanobubbles of hydrogen. And so this was the acronym that he made. It sounds like his name, right? That describes his gas. And it's you can see it on the web. This is from his patent. Here's his flexible blades. He would have electrolyzers. So with these flexible blades, he lowers the surface tension of the water, produces these reentrant jets, and launches an amazing number of nanobubbles of hydrogen, and he would study it. It's very important to snap the blades. So I know the snapping action draws the cavitation bubble, draws the vacuum type bubble behind the snapping event. And he stressed that in his patent. Very important that his blades are flexible so they snap. And so, his electrolyzer plates, drilled holes in them. Half the plate's gone. Right? That's stupid to do if you're making hydrogen, because you want the maximum surface area for electrolysis, for electron flow. But that was not the point. He says, I got to get that water into the electrolyzer itself, so from the snapping blades. And so basically, the reentrant jets would naturally flow into the electrolyzers, passing through the holes. And here's the peak of Ryoshi Masa. I think it's 2011. Well, Japanese news special, I think right after heels of Fukushima, featuring his discovery. So this is on prime time in Japan, like this newscast. This was famous, and in this newscast, in this news special in 2011, they featured this. This is broadcast to the country of Japan. There's the vibrating plates. He could drive a motor scooter on the gas itself. For cars, he intermixed natural gas, I think it was propane, with the Omasa gas. And I said, gee, you showed you were able to run a single engine. Why are you mixing gas? Well, he needs more flash. Doesn't have enough plasma around that nanobubbles. We'll get to that in a little later. Likewise, the generator experiments. He mixed the two together to get more flash onto the plasma itself. But of course, as an experiment, you intermix the second fuel. It does not make a clean experiment. So here it was in this graphic. It says, gee, it cost me 2 kilowatt hours of energy input. I'm getting 5 kilowatt hours of energy output. The panel's puzzled. This is over unity. How can this be? Right? That seems to violate science. And it would be even bigger if they work with the pure Omasa gas. But he didn't have enough plasma to really get it going. It was different. So I was interested in this. He seemed to be silenced. He was not publicly speaking. No more YouTubes, not seen since 2012. He was at any conference. He was last seen at the Omato conference speaking. And I thought he was suppressed. He might have been threatened out because somebody did investigate recently, said, no, he's still alive. His company's still there, but he's very, very quiet. And there's no publicity around him. And maybe they're still doing some projects. So it's possible that, and this happens a lot, you're suppressed, you're offered a contract. The deal is you just shut up. Here's some money. Here's a small application. And it's better than nothing, better than being dead like Stan Meyer. So that's the last on this. If he was suppressed, it was, you could call it, quote, a benign suppression. Just don't make any waves. And here's a project, here's some money, and just quietly go about your business. And so I've seen other examples of that type of agreement. Hydrosonic pump is another one. I think Denny Klein for a while out of Florida got a classified contract. And so you end up making some money, and you just do not disrupt the world. It turns out that nanobubbles can be made by ceramic nozzles. This is part of the Japanese discovery. They thought you had to use these cavitating devices to make them. Well, here's an easy way to make it. So it's a much cheaper way. It's a shearing activity, kind of like Archie Blue. You're blowing oxygen if you want to make oxygen nanobubbles against. So you're pushing oxygen through your ceramic nozzle. You're pushing oxygen through it. So you don't even have to make the channels that small. They can be on the order of microns. But it's important to have the shear flow of water next to it. So the water shears off the bubbles. And it's a shearing activity that converts the microbubbles that would normally be made into nanobubbles. So it's that shearing activity to make the nanobubbles itself. And and here's from the patent of Takahashi that says it's the charging of the bubbles themselves. It's the important thing that makes the bubble stable. And so and of course, Prevenslik wrote about that. See, if I have frictional rubbing from steam, I get these unusual forms that seem to be stable, these charged fog type forms. And that was discovered. Even an electrostatic boiler, people would get shocks from the rubbing. So turns out that these particles that are rubbing from the electrical interaction are from frictional interaction are making them. You see, that's what the very thing that happens in thunderclouds. And so if we have a surface on the electrodes themselves. The surface, very fragile surface, can, as you run the electrolyzer, can make small channels that likewise will allow nanobubbles to come off the surface. And that's why these microchannels, the surface preparation, was important on the various electrolyzers. Bob Boyce made a point of that in his presentation. Preparing these surfaces were needed to get the over unity, these excessive energy anomalies. And it's because those channels would be there to make it. And so we can gradually accumulate electrolyte precipitate on the surface while it emits, while carves the channels. And this was the conditioning step. And thus our electrolyzers could make more nanobubbles. And Ravi Raju shared on the web where he was doing experiments with tap water in India to produce the abundant nanobubble from surface preparation. Dave Lawton was an experimenter in England that replicated Stan Meyer's electrolyzer, and he talked about the importance of surface preparation for these devices, and it was conditioning the electrodes. So this was well shared on the web. And sure enough, it took about a month for him. And here's an example of the surface. If you touch the surface, you wreck it. And you've heard that from the other people making electrolyzers and conditioning surface. Do not touch it because you wreck those delicate channels that were made. Bob Boyce probably did the most to really promote this type of surface preparation for electrolyzers. And his technique only took 3 days to do it. Where he would get a nice rough surface and build up the residue. And then you wouldn't need the electrolyte anymore. You would now be able to produce enough of these bubbles coming off your electrolyzer to get the anomaly of running it. So the trick was get the nanobubbles off. So sputtering, turbulence, cavitation, all this activity was to get nanobubbles off. So we can look in hindsight, and the book was about that, the early chapters of the book, saying, how did people discover it? Why were these techniques really working? It was because we finally made this particle I was looking for, the strong nanobubble itself, to make the ball lightning surround, the plasma can surround it to make the ball lightning. And that's why they were getting the anomalies coming from the water electrolyzers. And some people were claiming over unity and running generators. There's one experiment out of Germany. They used the Anton cell, had a very narrow gap. So from the turbulence of the from the turbulence of the water flow, the gas flow, we scraped the bubbles off early. Likewise, Steve Eaton made a very tiny gap surrounding his electrolyzers between his two spiral plates. See that little fishing line? It's like that, the forcing the gas flow to spiral around the electrodes and getting into the tiny gap, shearing activity, we would get nanobubbles of hydrogen off the electrolyzers. And Steve claimed to self-run a generator from his technique. There's another suppression story. He tried to go on the web, I believe it was 2000, November 13th, 2011, or actually 2009, Friday the 13th, because the website was attacked. It was trying to share his plans. They finally got the information out. And then it was removed. So he likewise was very likely suppressed. And he had a lot of information. He was a wonderful inventor. Hobbyists, Oliver and Valentine, were participating in the blogs, the HHO community. They likewise made a self-running generator using that Anton cell, and they had a very famous YouTube they put up. I think it was from 2020, about riding this on a little cart, mobile cart, and taking it for an elevator ride. And they too were suppressed. And so rather than using electrolyzers and making nanobubbles, we can go simpler still. Why not just work with the fog particles themselves if we can make them strong? So we discovered a simplification. And so there's blogs discussing using ultrasonics to make fog and then going ahead and feeding that to the engine. But I think the real breakthrough occurred by Walt Jenkins, who, using electrostatic grids, was the key to making those fog particles strong. Because fog is very, very gossamer, very weak. So he ended up with the equivalent of making the charged nanobubbles. He made basically charged fog particles. This is the same type of mechanism. And that was the breakthrough for the simplest of all the inventions that I've seen. I give Walt high credit for this. He has the patent. He made the discovery because he's making charged fog particles, basically the same materials as thundercloud. Same principle. One could be a bubble. This is nothing more than a microscopic droplet of water. And so the ultrasonic frequencies typically makes a lot of visible fog. And there we have our fog particles, nothing more than a micron size droplet of water. That's all it is. If we go up in frequency, we can no longer see it, but we can still have it. And so really higher frequencies haven't been explored because people don't make ultrasonic foggers for that because you can't see the particles. Nonetheless, there could be interesting frequencies up at higher frequencies where we could make abundant, even smaller particles that could even be stronger still. So instead of thousands, we could have millions per event inside the combustion engine. So there's a wealth of scientific exploration still in front of us to even do better. But the key to making them was basically ultrasonics to making fog, and then having that grid where the fog is made by rubbing against them, and then you can guide the particles into the combustion engine with a grid of opposite charge, and then it would be sucked into on the downstroke of the piston, suck in that charged fog, and the charged fog is stable. That was the breakthrough, unlike uncharged fog, which is very gossamer and falls apart readily. All of a sudden, we have a strong particle that could exist. And sure enough, Walt did that type of thing with the wide plasma spark plug to energize it. Couldn't really claim that the importance of the wide plasma spark plugs because Robert Krupa has made the claim of the shape of the spark plug to make a lot of wide plasma. He was just thinking of internal combustion, gasoline combustion, to make a lot of plasma. It's like common sense. If I can make a bigger spark, make a wider spark, I will, ignite more gasoline. And so he has the patent for that. And there's experiments that people have done with the prototypes of that. And the patent is interesting to read because he had a variety of electrode configurations, all to help widen the plasma to come out. I like this type of a setup with these dimples because you can make glow plasma into those regions where the cathode dimples in, and you build up a lot of glow plasma, and then when you discharge the spark plug, that entire glow plasma flares out to make a very wide plasma spherical surface to really convert, right? In his case, was gasoline to ignite it, but in the case of working with charged fog particles, to surround those particles with plasma to pinch them in to make the ball lightning forms. Here's a GIF showing the spark plug in action. There's a few spark plugs that are sold commercially that involve making white plasma. On the typical tip electrodes, you gradually wear away those tips. But they're commercial devices, typically used in racing cars. Here's a capacitive discharge technique is used on the Polestar plug. This is an interesting plug using the same geometry. It was patented in 2016. They didn't know anything about Walt Jenkins' work or anybody else. This is common sense. Here where the patent features more exotic materials to lengthen the lifetime of the spark plug itself. And this was of interest because it actually was studied in my area. I know one of the inventors, and he shared some of his research with me that they were actually doing just one town north of me, where I live. Air Murakami runs the Energy Sciences Conference up in the Coeur d'Alene area of every year they have it. It was often called the Bedini Conference because John Bedini started that conference, and he's a very famous inventor of these energy devices. But what Aaron did was he had a team that made highly efficient plasma discharge from a capacitor to ignite, so he could provide a lot of plasma on one pulse. And I said, this is the key to get to, let's say, work on pure water as the experiment. Get a lot of plasma from capacitor discharge to surround the fog particles. So I wanted him and Walt Jenkins to team up. And he did invite Walt to join his conference, I believe, in 2017. And my hope is they combine their technologies to do pure water experiments to basically convert charge fog into a lot of ball lightning plasma. And this is he has some videos up. You can easily get his presentation from his website. And basically, that's what they made, the pulse plasmoid engine. Huge anomalous force in making all those particles tap the vacuum energy. So to wrap up, we could see why a claim of self-running a generator is just out of this world extraordinary, and mainly because the inefficiency of the internal combustion engine itself, that whatever anomaly you're producing has to be over the top huge. From this, it can't be hydrogen combustion for all the reasons we said. That just does not provide the energy. And here's this graphic really illustrates the point. You start with the fog particle, as the plasma surrounds it, the electrostriction starts to pinch it into the torus form to make the plasmoid. This is the key. The particle had to be strong enough. And it turned out charge fog was it. Charging the fog particles made them strong enough so that this activity would occur. So when surrounded by the plasma, they indeed would convert to the ball lightning form. And we'd have thousands, if not millions, of ball lightning events inside the internal combustion engine itself. And thus, that's where the coupling to the vacuum energy occurs. The self-organization occurs, it spirals in, gets coupled to the plasmoid form. Its form self-accelerates, and in that self-accelerates, this is an enormous force on the piston itself. And if we make like studied by Paul Pantone, bigger vortexes, especially vortexes of these plasmoid forms, will get a bigger energetic effect still. So that's what Paul said, gee, we were starting to discover this and getting extraordinary claims of these big energy effects. The water ox experiments were the clue that we were really getting it, and the anomalies indeed were from the submicron fog particles themselves. We learned that why the electrolyzers were significant, because underneath the significant thing under all these processes of conditioning surfaces and making nozzles were all for the sake of making the nanobubble form, so we'd have that particle. And that's where the anomalies were coming from, making that particle. We saw Stan Myers using the injector plug. Omasa was using his snapping blades. Walter Jenkins was using the ultrasound to get right to the particles themselves. He did not use electrolysis. He got hydrogen away from the system. So he had a clean experiment where we're working just with the fog particles themselves. The wide plasma spark plugs, that's to get your plasma to surround those particles. That's why you wanted these wide plasma forms. And so basically, there we have it. We're mimicking a thunderclap inside the internal combustion engine. Walt likewise got a dune buggy to run on it. And I predict he'll end up becoming more famous than Stan Myers because he really zeroed in with his invention on the critical form that this needs to take, simplifying the science by working with the water. So basically, there it is. The why you combine the two technologies, the making the charge fog with the wide plasma spark plug. So mimic a thunderclap in the internal combustion engine. That's all it takes. to change the world. So basically, that's the presentation. We showed the books. The books are readily available. You can get them from Adventures Unlimited Press directly from the publisher. It's out on Amazon. If you just Google my name, you can get to the books. Here's the name synchronicity that really got me propelled into this research as my life's quest. Here's the latest book that Joe helped me with that just came out last year, basically summarizing this search. The search for the particle, and is the last chapter is the most important because that was the breakthrough chapter of Walt Jenkins, who finally got us to the pure thunderclap engine and got us away from the electrolyzer. So the book was my search for the particle that could support the ball lightning, and I really did not discover it until 2015. So in a sense, I was late to the party, but boy, did all the dots connect at the end of 2015, and all of a sudden discovering at the beginning of 2016, Walt Jenkins and his research that were, when I read the patent, it was my synergistic miracle, knocked my socks off. He's doing the very thing I said to do a few months earlier at the International Water Conference. He's been doing it all along. He was the first to do it. His patent application, I think, is all the way back 2011, doing the research in 2010. I got the cover story in 2012 of Infinite Energy magazine. It didn't quite have it, but I would present it the work of Mark Leclerc. There's interesting anomalies associated with it. Paradigm shifts. This is where I discuss this video I did with Gary Hendershot, who was doing the Smart Scarecrow show. And basically, this is where we discussed what's stopping us. Well, that was the question, kind of brainstorm a discussion with Gary. And this video is up on the web. I think you just Google my name with the word paradigm, and you can get to this presentation that we did. So I'll pose the question back to you guys. What do you think is stopping us? What's stopping humanity from proceeding with the discovery?
Yeah, it definitely seems to be suppressed. Just the powers that be, really. Maybe it's the oil tycoons, or maybe also I thought about maybe just people aren't ready. And I mean, what would people even do?
Yeah, and as we were brainstorming this, I would say number one, we talked. It's number one by far is belief. It's believed to be absolutely impossible, and if you don't believe it, you won't even try. And I would say most suppression is what I would call benign. Nobody's threatening you, nobody's killing you, or threatening your family. It's just ridicule. This is impossible. I can't believe it. All the professors will say that. So you can't do it. If you raise money for your project, they'll say you're running a fraud. They'll put you in court for doing fraud, and they'll get the esteemed professor from the university who will just tell everybody this is obviously impossible. Therefore, they're doing a fraud and using basically threats of litigation to stop you, dissipating all the money to hire lawyers to shut down the projects. So number one by far is belief. It's very rare where a project is so together that the inventor would be actually approached and threatened. And what's the type of threat they threaten? His family, right? Says you will cease and desist. They only go after those projects that actually threaten to breach the marketplace. A ton of people do experiments. A ton of people talk. Talk is cheap. There's like maybe for every 1,000 people talking about it, maybe one person's actually doing the experiment. And how few of those experiments are truly successful at getting to a self-running generator, and then to the point they can actually breach the marketplace with their business. A lot of inventors are their own worst enemies. They can't run the business very well. It's a different mindset to run a business and grow a business than it is to be an inventor. Mm-hmm. They're naturally paranoid. Oh, people would steal it, right? They're afraid of that. So it stops them from proceeding. So they're left alone. Very few, I'd say, very few projects are actually even suppression worthy, where they have it working properly. They're either trying to get it out to the world by getting others to replicate, or they are trying to breach the marketplace by making a device and selling it. When they reach that point where you have to get into manufacturing, then it's very easy to be a target for suppression. You have to start with a factory somewhere, some manufacturing facility, and then your one location is very easy to come in and just simply threaten you. Most inventors simply succumb to the threat. They don't need to be killed. You have a few headstrong people that are idealistic. Stan Meyer certainly was one of them. I think Eugene Maloff, editor of Infinite Energy magazine, was one of them. It was refused to succumb to any threats. And those are the few people that are killed. I personally know 6 people that have been murdered. And typically they were the inventors presenting at the energy conferences. That's how I met them. They were my heroes. They were doing the experimental work, and they certainly had traction. And so those people uh, were idealistic, right? They weren't going to stop, but just by being threatened.
Wow,
Yeah.
crazy. Uh, do you believe that UFO technology exists, and is this the same kind of technology we're talking about here?
In the sense that was Ken Shoulder's connection, his observation says, gee, these little EV forms, this microscopic ball lightning, takes off like a warp drive. And that's, in essence, in a very crude sense, uh, like a UFO type propulsion. It's not being controlled, it's a simple anomalous acceleration in every direction that ends up putting an anomalous force on the piston for a few milliseconds. And so, yes, the answer is yes. I think at the foundation in the science is the same type of thing, but it's not under control. Like you surround yourself with the plasma when you're controlling the field so well that you're able to steer. In a way, it's a very crude example of it, where we make it for a few milliseconds. It creates a self-acceleration event, which manifests as excessive pressure on the piston, but it's a start. We're tapping the zero point energies, tapping the vacuum energy with the anomaly, and it's like the UFO propulsion for, as I said, a few milliseconds for the downstroke of the piston.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of ironic that this technology is probably already in existence and already being used all the time, and here you are like rediscovering it as it in like parallel is already existing.
Yeah, we're rediscovering it and rediscovering it. It's, you could say, a paradigm shift. Paradigm word was really, I think, uh, emphasized by Thomas Kuhn on the structure of scientific revolutions. I think he wrote it in the late 60s. I highly recommend the book for anybody doing this research so you can understand why the ridicule, why the disbelief, why the suppression. It's like you're changing the worldview. Every thundercloud is actually tapping the zero point energy on those lightning events, right? That's a whole nother way of looking at it, saying that vacuum energy really exists and can be used. That changes our beliefs on everything. Could this be happening out in the stars? We'd have a whole new theory that could manifest on explaining what 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 propels even the stars. Well, we're just scratching the surface. Once this energy is interacting, basically it changes everything. It changes our view of the universe, changes what is possible. You can revisit everything and say, gee, is there zero point energy involved with this? It's paradigm shifts, as Thomas Kuhn states. The scientists do not want to change their mind. They just want to believe what they've learned, and they kind of die off, and the next generation picks it up that do believe the new science, and that's how the world evolves. It evolves by gradually by a new set of scientists, the next generation of scientists believing in the new ideas, the experiments. The old generation won't even look at the experiments. They just make decrees, and that's basically what's stopping us. That's really the beliefs. And if then his experiments are done and his information is shared, it's kind of like the open source community, I think, is the key to really punching it through. Rather than saying, I want to own it and control it all myself, let's get it out in open source for experimenters to do. If we can get it at the hobbyist level, which this is obviously simple enough to get to the hobbyist level, where garage guys can do it. And it's just basically mimicking a thunderclap. That's all you have to think.
Have you been following the news, seeing all the UFO news lately? It seems like there's maybe a slow disclosure coming out agenda.
Well, that would be nice. Because, if we could get formal contact with more enlightened beings that learn not to club each other over the head because new energy is discovered. Therefore, we have to use it as a weapon to control people. Just having an interaction with a more mature race would certainly help humanity and help steer us out of this war separateness mentality that the human race seems to be in. Well, I wouldn't say the human race. I think the majority of people would enjoy, cooperating and getting into a live and let live interaction. It's the people that seek power and control. They seem to be causing the trouble.
I just had one more observation, and we'll wrap up. The torus shape of that plasma vortex photo is similar to the Nassim Haramein model of the universe. What's the connection there? Have you?
Yeah, I would say it was an archetype. Interesting to see that torus form appearing and reappearing at all different levels. It's fascinating. It's also fascinating to see a revelation to people. Gamble, Foster Gamble, the Thrive movement. You saw his introductory, the first hour of it, saying this vortex form was completely in his head. I noticed the same thing in the 70s as I was starting. I would be find people, other researchers that were having these visions of the vortex form as being very important. I certainly was aware of it at the time. When I saw the ball lightning, it really resonated with me emotionally. That said, this is important. This is the form. And I was happy to see. Yeah, I said that in 1978, and it's all continued to come true. Came true in spades for the study of Ken Shoulder's work. And I called it donuts on the brain. It's like the Lord wanted everybody to be Homer Simpson, having this revelation. But it certainly was an archetype that has been imprinted upon researchers intuitively.
Yeah, Viktor Schauberger too. The vortex was very important to him.
Yeah, and I think the evidence, if you look at the experiments, is certainly showing that. So there's like a consciousness shift that goes along with this, right? In fact, paradigm shifts are a consciousness shift. It's mankind needs to realize, like, we're a connected being, right? If we're going to do a discovery of new energy, we can't just take it in the weapons just to blow ourselves up with it. It's ludicrous. So if we want to join, our brothers, let's say, out in the stars, we need to mature up where we're not space cowboys, and our goal is to shoot it up and destroy everybody and conquer everybody and each other with weapons. We need to wake up the fact that we're a connected being and mature to that where we can handle virtually infinite energy safely. And so we need this consciousness shift. It's kind of like we're being stopped, we're sequestered, and we're in a playpen. We're not to make this discovery until there's a maturity in the consciousness of the human race. And I think there is there in general. I think most people would gladly love each other. It's just people can get fanatical as they club each other and get mad. And then we lose track of the fact that we are really one connected being as a global conscious being that's really connected together. And we need to be in that state of mind, that consciousness, maybe have telepathy with each other, I really think that the consciousness movement is a critical movement that allows this technology to actually manifest and be safely received by humanity. And so I think that's where we're at. I think humanity, if we shift our consciousness and we recognize that we are indeed a connected being, as people wake up to that, not only will we start to have more telepathy and intuitive connections with each other, and certainly more empathy in our feelings connecting with each other, but we will actually have formal contact, and we will be basically gifted this technology. We'll kind of gift it as the discovery simply unfolds. We've already made the technical discovery. It's just being stopped because I really think the consciousness has matured to that recognition. And when it does, we'll simply have it. In short, the human race is really safe. With unlimited energy, we have enough engineering knowledge that we can make utopia, physical utopia on Earth. We just need the spiritual maturity, is not to use it as a weapon systems for self-destruction.
Yes, it's just a matter of choosing the right reality. That's the one I choose. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Moray, so much. I mean, that was a lot to digest and a lot to learn. Thank you so much for going through all of that with us. And how can people find you if they want to look more into your research? I know they can go to Adventures Unlimited or to get your books.
Yeah, it's very simple. Google my name. That's all you have to do. I'm a page oneer because of my unusual first name, and boy, was it a synchronistic miracle to be named that. Moray King, spelled M-O-R-A-Y. You just Google that. You can get to my material, and basically all the presentations and all the YouTubes that have been made over the years are available. You can hunt it down on the web.